Hello, and welcome to Confidently Wrong, a show by regular dudes talking with confidence about content we have no right to speak about with any kind of authority, but do it anyway. I'm Wesley Nakamura, and as always, I'm joined by award-winning director Brian Redondo and Savon Jones, aka Captain Bonnie. This is episode 117, and we investigate the new Marvel Disney Plus series, Secret Invasion. I'm confident that it's going to be the best show you've ever listened to, and well, hey, if it's not, you can always ask us for a refund.
Incredible!
Hello, gentlemen! Welcome to another episode of Confidently Wrong. It's good to see you all.
What a dude.
This is going to be a fun
Good
one.
to
I
see
think
you.
we got a brand new Marvel MCU TV show. Good to see you guys. Hat tip. Boop. We're all in different states of hair disarray. Mostly Savon has it extremely well together. Brian just got a haircut, but he's not super satisfied with it. And
You don't like your haircut, bro? I kind of like it.
I like it
I
too.
like
I
it, but
don't know.
it
He
needs
feels-
styling, man. It like, and I'm not entirely sure what that style is.
Does it feel like it's too upwards right now?
It's a little up.
I think he
it's a
thinks
little
it's going
out.
to the side too much. It's going up and over a little bit.
Yeah, I see what it's kind of, yeah. I'm seeing a lot of forehead, but that's just like you got to style it. You're going to figure it out.
Don't hit on
We
the
just got
forehead.
big foreheads, y'all.
I'm not hating on the forehead. I just said I
Who's
see
got
a lot.
five
There's
head?
nothing wrong with having a large forehead. Rihanna has a large forehead, and that woman is beautiful. So
I just learned that her last name is Fenty. Like her born given family name is Fenty. That's how she came. I didn't realize that was why her product line was named Fenty.
yeah, she kept it very
Oh.
to the point on the nose.
Yeah.
I thought Fenty was
you not know that
like
either?
some slang that I just hadn't heard of. Like, yo, that's Fenty.
Oh, that could work though.
Nah, you know you're making it in life when your last name just becomes slang. Ooh, Fenty.
Well,
Damn,
you can Jones.
Nakamura.
That's a verb. Yeah.
Don't
That
know if
doesn't
that
work as
one
well.
rolls off the doesn't roll off the tongue. I think too many syllables. Nakamura, yeah.
So we're gonna talk Secret Invasion, starring Samuel L. Jackson and a host of other cameos.
Hell yeah.
This is we've had to wait quite a bit since we've seen an MCU series. Is Hawkeye the last one that we really saw? Oh, or was it Ms. Marvel?
It was all stuff that was like, late last year, right?
Yeah. Well, Hawkeye was around Christmas. I feel like Ms. Marvel maybe came out after that or something. But anyways, it's been a while. It's been a few months, which is kind of a drought for the MCU TV streaming stuff, Disney Plus stuff, because they kind of hit us with like one after another every couple months for a while there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one they announced a while ago, and I know, Savon, you were really excited about it.
Very.
I know nothing about Secret Invasion. I had no idea what was going to happen. Like, I barely know anything about the Skrulls, except I even forgot that they could shapeshift. I knew they were green, but when they introduced that in the first episode, I was like, oh, that's right. That was their power
That's
set.
right. You forgot that they could. That's like their defining
the only thing
characteristic.
they can do, yeah.
It's cool, Wes.
So that's where I'm at. Where were you guys at? Brian, what do you know about like Secret Invasion, the storyline, maybe from the comics or previews that you saw? What were you expecting? Yeah, what is your familiarity with this line of the MCU?
Yeah, I just knew that it was about Skrulls morphing into humans and infiltrating planet Earth. And I'm pretty sure that in the comics they're posing as different superheroes as well, and that's a big part of the storyline. But beyond that, I am not very well initiated into how this grand story is going to carry out in the end. But I'm glad that a series like this existed, or I was very optimistic about a series like this because it is a Nick Fury centered story, and I was hoping for more of that. Secret spy work, bite, some shield stuff, getting back into the kind of the underbelly of the MCU, all the things happening in the background, all the strings being pulled. And I just felt like that would offer some interesting storytelling that we haven't had in a while, probably not since, Captain America 2. I'm blanking on the subtitle
Hard
on
agree.
that one.
So,
but-
Captain, the Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier, yeah, which is like one of the best ones.
All right.
Clearly.
And Savon, what was your familiar? Have you read the comic series Secret Invasion?
I've read some of Secret Invasion. I won't pretend that it's my favorite comic book storyline because I think in the comics it's a little wild. Like having so many heroes. I think this story medium works really well in the TV medium that they're using for it. I think actually better than the comic, for many reasons. The main one being the writing in the comics was a little bit kind of all over the place quality wise, especially with is this character a Skrull, and then learning which characters were Skrulls I think wasn't done in as quality of a way. So I knew about it, but I've always loved the premise of it, and frankly, I was hyped about Secret Invasion the first time I saw Captain Marvel, the first one, because they kind of did a little fake out. And actually, when I was in LA last week, me and Kendall rewatched Captain Marvel. By the way, way better movie in hindsight. We rewatched it and I'm like, wait,
really?
This movie has aged really well. Like, there's a few cheesy parts, but like that movie got way too bad of a rep early on. It's actually a really good movie, actions and all. But that's aside. Captain Marvel hyped me up because they kind of did a Secret Invasion fake out, right? Where you think the Skrulls are trying to infiltrate Earth, and they're, historically in the comics, they're villains, point blank. There's no ambiguity. They are like the quintessential evil invading space alien lizard people, right? Like, it's pretty on the nose. And, the movie faked us out into thinking, actually, they're innocent refugees, which was a good fake out. And I thought, I guess we're not going to get Secret Invasion. Bam, no, we're actually going to save it for the show. And so I was hyped to see, okay, how do we go from what the Skrulls were in Captain Marvel to now? What happened? How do we get to this point? And dude, it was awesome. Like there's just no other way to. Yeah, I guess what I can say is I'm hyped for Secret Invasion. I like what I've gotten so far. And to Brian's point, some of my favorite MCU content was always when they go pretty much just like spy thriller, Jason Bourne, Bond type stuff where it's not like criminal underbelly, but more so geopolitics underbelly. And so far they are delivering. So I'm very hyped.
All right, the rest of this
happy so far.
Good. The rest of this is spoilers heavy, so if you haven't seen it yet, go see it, then come back and listen. Or you can
First
just listen
2 episodes.
Know that the spoilers are coming. Yeah, we're only going to talk about the first 2 episodes. That's all that's come out yet, as of the time that we were recording this. So, like Savon said, it does seem like we're getting a little bit more of a spy thriller, someone kind of like a Jack Ryan trying to head off an impending, doomsday scenario or terrorist attack or whatever, takeover of a government, that sort of genre of TV show or movie. Obviously, Savon, you've been favorable to it so far. Brian, what are your first impressions on the tone, kind of the action, dialogue, all that good stuff, so far?
It's kind of a mixed bag, I think. The first episode out the gate, a little rough, I think, and kind of reminded me of Falcon and the Winter Soldier in the worst ways. That there are there's some pretty good moments. The opening chase, that was fun enough. But then a lot of bad moments where there's too much going on, there's too much exposition, and characters that you really don't feel anything for. However, I will say the second episode, on the other hand, almost felt night and day to the first one. And so in that one, I did feel like not necessarily spy stuff, but deception as being a key thing that was happening throughout that episode, and lended to a lot of tension, a lot of great tension, and reveals that I think paid off very nicely in the second episode. Yeah, so we get to see kind of Gravlock and what he's doing, working with a secret council of Skrulls who have already infiltrated the upper echelons.
Wait, isn't that the Transformer
of
guy?
Culture.
Gravlock.
Wait, who's the Skrull? Who's the Skrull?
Gravik.
Gravik is the Skrull.
Gravik?
What's the Grimlock?
You're
I'm
thinking of Gridlock
from Transformers.
The dinosaur, the Dinobot.
Yeah, Grimlock, right?
Hey, Grimlock. Gridlock, that's probably a totally different Autobot.
That's LA all the time.
These are all different Transformers.
So
Gravik.
we got the leader of the renegade faction of the Skrulls. It turns out he is actually working with and takes over the council of all the rest of the other Skrulls, who have also already infiltrated, the upper echelons of human society. And I think that, that was a really great reveal. It really amped up the stakes of what was happening, and makes the secret invasion feel like like a secret invasion, right? As it should. And then, on the flip side of that, we finally get more with Nick Fury. I think in the first episode, he's kind of meandering about. You don't really know where this guy has been and what he's been up to. In the second episode, I still feel a little bit of that. Like we're not getting a Jason Bourne equivalent. We're not getting a Master Spy equivalent. I have not felt that at all from Nick Fury's character. But at the very least, in the second episode, we get a great tete-a-tete between him and Rhodey, played by Don Cheadle, which was, just like, the kind of scene that you dream would happen in a movie franchise where these two great actors both exist, right? And they finally delivered on something like that, and it's just it's just a treat.
Cooking each other too.
They was cooking. That was some good stuff. I was in my chat like, ooh, he talking that talk. Talking that talk.
When De Niro finally acts in a scene with Pacino and they're going at it, right? Like we finally got that Don Cheadle, Sam Jackson, and they're like hating on each other, and it just works so well. So I feel like the show finally is ramping up in the second episode, and we're getting some of the goodness that you could only imagine that this kind of premise would deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my impressions, they haven't done the thing where they like do winks and nods, right? This isn't a self-aware show, which is nice, I think, in contrast to some of the other stuff that they've done, where they've leaned so far into like the silliness of it or the humor of it, right? And kind of like self-parodied almost, at certain times. This one is just very earnestly trying to put on a good, like, how do we stop this, invasion from happening, or how do we stop the ramifications from happening? I also like that it's, there is the stakes of, like, I'm going to destroy the whole world, but it isn't the stakes of, like, well, I'm doing it with, like, this nebulous, like, nuclear bomb, right? Like, really, it does feel like Gravik's group has been putting in the work to actually infiltrate and take down society over time. And it's a long game, it's a long plan. It's not just like a comic book, like, oh, ha ha ha, like, this is so fun, I can blow things up. It's like, okay, we're gonna set off this little tiny explosion over here, which is gonna kill, people in the square. And then this over here, we're gonna, like, infiltrate this organization, or we're gonna get some information out of this person. And all of that, especially in the second episode, makes the threat seem very real, very likely, not it's not just villain of the week type of stuff, right? Like, they're really about this life of how do we get to our end goal. And I also was wondering, like, they describe Gravik as like the rebels, but at this point it seems like Gravik and the rest of these folks that are here are like kind of the majority of the Skrulls on Earth, maybe, or maybe they have sympathies or support from a majority of the Skrulls on Earth. So I don't know that there's so much the rebellion is. Maybe they're just the main part of the Skrull influence on Earth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the thing about the Skrull Council, right? Because what was interesting about that scene was that a lot of the Skrull Council actually was totally content just letting the status quo be what it is, and they just live in positions of, like, power, That's what made it interesting, is that they weren't really interested in taking over. Gravik's the one who came in with that heat, saying, drinking the man's wine, eating with their forks, calling them sellouts and whatnot. That's what really made that scene scarier, is that even though they had already infiltrated Earth ages ago, they weren't really doing any negative influences, at least no more than regular people in positions of power like that would do. I don't think the Skrull prime minister is going to be any better or worse for humanity than the regular prime minister. Like that's just or the Fox News parody guy. Like,
oh man,
I'll probably just take the Skrull version. but that's what made that interesting, is that Graphic did kind of like do a hard takeover, and that's what really made it scary, because it was interesting that they were criticizing him, saying, hey, you were murdering people, that is not cool. And that alone, like, even just little moments like that for me are things that are making the show stand out as good, because nothing is really super black and white. There's a lot of gray across all the factions. Like, they already clearly planted the seeds for some Skrull infighting a little bit, right? Like, this is gonna be one of those shows where you're really going to appreciate it once the whole thing is out, because then I think even these episodes we've seen already, we're going to see in a different light, because I'm sure we're going to see character interactions that get reframed based on things that we learned about them.
Well, I think a lot of this is going to hinge on how well Emilia Clarke's character Gaia, how believable it is, and her journey through which side she ends up sort of choosing to be on, right? Like, if we buy in, whichever side she ends up going with, if we buy in that, like, that's the choice her character would have made, and that it was difficult for her to make it, and that she understands whichever way she goes, she's going to be hurting somebody or giving up something, then I think the show will work. I think if Gaia ultimately choosing, whichever side, let's say she chooses with her dad's side or whatever, which is kind of seems the way she's going to go, if that doesn't feel earned, I think it's going to end up being kind of like, all right, whatever. Like that, I think whether people can make the case on how much she loses and how much she gains, I think that's going to be whether we really buy this series or not. Because everybody else seems like they're pretty clearly set on which side they're going to be on.
Yeah,
I got a question, though.
You never know how things swap up. What's up?
Savon, you bring up a good point that the Council of Skrulls are totally content in their positions of power on Earth, and leaving that be. But why were all of them in such positions in the first place? Like, how is it that suddenly the Skrulls have the top position at the UN and the Prime Minister of the UK? Is that a concentrated, or is that a concerted effort on their part?
That's not the impression I got, mainly because they were so clearly against everything that Gravik was doing. And it was very clear in that, like, and I rewatched some of that council scene, right? Like, they were kind of divided down the middle, or a little bit. They were soft divided. Gravik clearly bullied the others into submission because he planned it with some of the other members. But my impression was that the positions of power can let them still influence things that might benefit them. But I don't see that them influencing things for whatever their personal or gain is the same as them trying to do something that benefits the larger Skrull race. Or at least, at the very least, not anything that involves them wiping out humanity. Because regardless, and one of the people even said it, right? Like, okay, we start this nuclear war and destroy everything. Okay, then what? Because in their minds, all right, but if you destroy all of the human infrastructure that lets us live these lives of comfort, well, that doesn't really seem worth it. And so, I don't know. I guess my point more so is that you can try and poke holes in what that logic is, but my understanding was, if you're in a position of power and you're holding it down and you eating good, living good, then, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And obviously Gravik took issue with that. But if anything, it adds layers to the Skrull Council, because it's not just, because, part of my head will be thinking, well, if you're in a position of power, why would you suddenly be like, yeah, nuclear war? Clearly I guess I'm really saying that they sold me on the different Skrulls having their motivations, and it makes Gravik's actions that much more scary, because they were like, yo, I just want to chill. And he really bullied them into saying, nah, we getting it in. We doing this thing.
Well, so let's skip to the fourth question then. So
yeah,
oftentimes, like, MCU struggles a little bit with stakes. Like, sometimes it's like way too much stakes for like what we're dealing with, and sometimes it's like, does this really matter? Like, they're kind of, sometimes they get the balance off. Sometimes they do it perfectly well, and you're like, chef's kiss, great.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, the setup is basically Gravik and his group want to wipe out all the humans on Earth eventually, or subjugate them or whatever, so that they can take over the planet and have their own home planet, especially after Skrullos, their home planet, was either destroyed or messed up in their war, or they were banished or whatever. So how do we feel in terms of the stakes here? I think one of the things that makes the stakes work is we haven't really seen them do anything so over the top. They're not trying to yet, right? Like let off a nuclear bomb in the middle of Belgium or whatever.
I want to be clear.
Well, they had a bomb in Red Square.
And I want to be clear. That wasn't like just a boom bomb. That was a dirty bomb. Like they made it very clear that was like a nuclear. Like that was.
Was it?
Yes, they made like there was the whole plot point of the bomb the rebels got was like a dirty bomb. So this wasn't
So it makes everybody sick as well.
Yeah, like I mean, you know what a dirty bomb is, right?
Yeah, but then Nick Fury was right there and he's not sick. Like that doesn't make sense.
That's a whole nother thing, and we haven't seen the rest of the show, so maybe that they'll do that. But point is that
I guess you're right.
They said literally thousands have died. So like
so it wasn't little, but it wasn't. I mean, it's not like let's kill every human on Earth big, right?
No, I agree with you though that like it's a good middle ground of this is. I mean, I think for the level of threat it's meant to be global. West, I actually think you're right. I think that strikes a good balance of they're a legitimate threat because at first episode I didn't think that bomb plan was gonna go off exactly how they wanted it to, and it results in thousands dead. I'm like, that's awful, but I think that set the tone of like, this is real stuff. Regardless of how this goes, right? Regardless of like, we know the Skrulls aren't going to win and destroy the world, but regardless, damage has already been done in the process, and that alone already sells me on the stakes a lot. Like, you don't need to have the villains win for the stakes to feel real. You just got to have them be successful enough to where they feel like a credible threat. And them successfully framing Fury, bombing the square, getting the world tensions that high already says, they bout this life.
Yeah.
They do this.
And they were able to get the American like arrested, right, or the guy playing the American arrested, all that kind of stuff.
Big false flag.
Yeah. So like they're not like patsies here. They're not just the sweatshirt gang or whatever they were called, the sweatsuit mafia.
And
what
at the
sort
same
of makes
time,
this work too is that I was gonna say, well, real quick, and what makes this work for me is that they've been patient, right? They show us the scene of Nick Fury promising that he was gonna work with them to find a place where they could live, and it's been 30, 40 years, whatever, and it makes sense to me that someone who's maybe a little bit more on the radical end would be really upset at this point that like, where is any progress that you've made here? You kind of used us to do your bidding in S.H.I.E.L.D. and in all of these other scenarios where we had to put ourselves at risk, and we don't see any benefit coming our way, right? And so the personal vendetta against Nick Fury in particular makes sense to me. And it makes sense that he's wanting to not only get a world for himself, but also to like make Nick Fury pay in the process. Like that to me feels like not a reasonable thing, but like a thing that could happen, especially in like a thriller or a movie, rather than, he just wants to take over the world because he wants unlimited power, right?
This is what we deal with the Mujahideen. This is literally the U.S. and the Mujahideen of just, hey, we gonna hook it up and we got you. Broken promises, lies, and then you end up creating your own enemy because of a lack of
and that feels
follow-up or whatever. That's
that feels
multiple
grounded
times in real
in
life.
things we've done, the CIA has done, right? So, I like that. I like that aspect of this that we're not. Yeah, I like that aspect that we're not just being force fed like a power hungry maniac, who wants to take over, or like high evolutionary. Although I did like high evolutionary, but this sort of, they tie it to some kind of reality that we can understand. Brian,
disenfranchised people getting radicalized is one of the oldest tropes it's been around and they didn't. I'm just agreeing, they did it super well. I was sold on that,
and they haven't overdone that part of it, right? It's just there, it's in the background.
It makes 40 years.
And I think part of what makes it work also is that so far, at least, they are not harnessing some MacGuffin weapon or something. Tesseract. I'm looking at you.
They're not trying to Tesseract.
Yeah. It's not some like mumbo jumbo weapon that is threatening the entire planet, and we're just going after that thing. I very much like the fact that this is a much more subtle approach, and that they are going to fabricate a nuclear war between two world powers, right? The U.S. and Russia, which like has a lot of precedence in history and real life, like you mentioned, and the whole fact of fabrication, I think, is also really interesting, right? Like that, to me, that feels very grounded in where we're at with news and all that kind of stuff, and how that might play out. in a real world context. So
Stay
I
tuned
think
for next episode, friends.
I think that's kind of interesting. And the Skrull rebels, I think an important point of comparison are the Flag Smashers from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who to me were not a very credible, believable group at all. Like they just weren't very interesting because they were like people from the blip who were living all over the planet, and all of that just like required an amount of like logic or disbelief of reality that it just didn't add up. Plus their leader wasn't all that interesting. Here we have kind of the opposite of that, I think, where you can understand the resentment that a group of refugees might feel, broken promises, and then trying to play the world powers off of each other. That seems a lot more easier to grasp. And then you got Grimlock leading them, who himself is a gangster. Like he's such an interesting character. As soon as he marches into that High Council meeting, you're like, man, this guy, I'm with him. Like, I'm not rooting for him, but this dude is legit.
They were hating on him for wearing regular civilian human clothes, and he really had to he really turned up on him. He really was just saying, y'all wearing the man's clothes. He really called them sellouts. He really came in with that. Yeah, the dude has presence. The guy has presence. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Shoot him right here in the forehead.
Before?
What do you mean, that actor or that character?
Yeah, the actor.
I mean, probably, but nothing I recognize. But
Kingsley Ben-Adir. Let's see.
Dude is...
It's probably a Masterpiece Theater.
Yeah, dude is
the
good,
OA,
though.
Peaky Blinders. All right, nothing huge. Yeah, nothing. This is his first major role. Everything else has been just a few episodes here and there on different shows. All right.
Well, I guess which question we on?
We were on 4.
All right. Okay, yes, that's fine with me. Cool. So another thing about the story I gotta say is I am so glad they're leaning. Well, first of all, I've said this before about previous stuff, is that I like that the Marvel Comics characters have such a wide range of tone that lets you do different types of stuff. I like that Ms. Marvel was able to be a more of a lighthearted, family-ish comedy and be a bit more chill. I like that She-Hulk was just a full sitcom in terms of like its tone. Now, whether you like it as its own thing, but I like that tonally the characters let you do a lot of different things. To your point earlier, Wes, about the show being serious, I am glad they've leaned hard into the TV-14 element and they're really earning that rating, because this is one of those projects where spy thriller stuff, you can get into some dark territory, and those little things of how dark you make it, I think, can sell you on how high the stakes are. So the fact that we got an actual torture scene that they, especially for like MCU and really in general, that was a really gritty torture scene where the MI6 lady has the false flag Skrull captured, and I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna see what's up. And it starts off silly at first, right? Because they got the generic goon who's just kind of like, wait, she's not talking. Ruffle his hair on the way out, slap his head. And I'm like, oh, y'all so silly. And then she starts injecting this man with liquid fire, chops off a effing finger. She was putting it, but she's just so charming. Which, by the way, the actress who played her, I loved her. She was so just campy, but like I was so uncomfortable with her in the space.
Oscar-winning Olivia Colman.
The fact. Thank you. The fact that they killed Maria Hill early on, which regardless of how you feel about how dignified the death is, they didn't pull punches. She got shot. There was blood. There was no fake out. Even Gravik beating up the goons. He shot multiple goons on screen, murdered with a gun, threw a guy on a meat hook. And they're doing a good balance of it's gritty, it's violent, it's not egregious, but this isn't just your superheroes playing punch in the backyard. Like, the stakes are these are things that sell me on the stakes of this, because even the Skrulls, right? Like, they're superhuman strong, but they're not superhuman durable. You shoot one in the head, they dead. So like I guess the show's doing a good job of balancing
durable.
I'm saying, but the show is doing a good job of balancing how effective the various factions are, right? Like, the MI6 people aren't just completely helpless idiots. Even the U.S. government folks, they are plugged into stuff too, and they even knew about the Skrulls a little bit before Fury. Fury didn't know that they knew a little bit, because War Machine or Rhodey knew. And so little things like that to me are really selling me on the quality of the story and the direction it's going to go, because I love a show where you have multiple competing factions that are all actually good at their jobs. I don't think I'd enjoy this show as much if it was just the Skrulls making all the world governments look like complete idiots. Skrulls are still taking L's. You know, that interrogation led to Gravik having to kill one of his men, which actively undermined his own, I think, his messaging with his people. You know, there's little stuff like that that's making the show, it's making it very clear that the writers were really intentional about what kind of story they wanted to tell. And they weren't just telling like a cookie cutter story. They're really putting in work of character having facial expressions to certain things happening, and facial expressions that imply, hey, this is going to be important later. Like, I feel really strongly Gravik's ruthlessness is going to undermine his leadership, because you've already had moments where people are like, well, maybe our fearless leader doesn't know it all. Or you see him do cruel stuff to his fellow folks. And, you know, even just the Skrull in the council was like, yo, I don't get down with any of this. Those are the layers of nuance that I think are going to push this show from good to great. But main thing is they're embracing the TV-14. I did not think they were going to cut a dude's finger off live on screen
with
and
blood.
show with blood and in the finger and show the finger linger on screen and transform. You know, they could have did the whole clean camera cutaway. Like, nah, he's a Skrull, green finger. All right, let's get cooking.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited about the story element of where this is going.
So the cast has been pretty good. I mean, we already mentioned Gravik. We mentioned Don Cheadle, Samuel L. I'm kind of mad. So we were going to ask what have been standout performances for you and the characters you've really enjoyed. And I was going to talk about Samuel L. Jackson and Don Cheadle having their little face-off. But you guys already talked about it. So
there's more. Like, what are some of the detailed stuff you liked about it? Because I have my own thoughts, but they're, you know, black guy thoughts about it.
I
want to hear the black guy
that
thoughts.
Was part of the... That wasn't even that wasn't even subtext. That was just text, part of that, you know, discussion that they were having. I think it just, there was a lot that was like said, there was a lot that was unsaid. It also wasn't necessarily just about race, right? Like Nick Fury was almost being like in a weaker position of saying like, well, we should do each other a solid because we're both black. And Rhodey is like, bro, in order for that to be the case, like you have to be competent. Like I'm not just out here doling out favors for no reason at all, right? Like, you know, this is not affirmative action happening here. Speaking of, you know, R.I.P. Supreme Court. But like, you know, that was the message, right? Which is like a very real pervasive ideology, I think, both in the black community, but also just in general, right? Of like merit-based, like, no, you bring your shit to the table and like you hit the standard. They call it the standard, right? People like to call it, or the bar, or not. And at that moment, right, he's realizing like Nick Fury doesn't have the goods right now. Like he doesn't have the position of power that he's had in the past. And he's also been messing things up in terms of geopolitical relationships, and therefore, like, he's a liability. And so, like, the actual right call, right, in quotes, is to just, like, leave him twisting in the wind. Like, hey, you made this mess. Like, I'm not trying to save you from this mess because that's going to create even more of a mess for me than I've already gotten. And so, like, but just the way, the intensity with which they were doing it, the way that Don Cheadle never stood up, he just sat back and he just said, nah, bro, you ain't anything right now, right? Like, in his tone, his seriousness, and just like Samuel L. Jackson just being like, don't you worry, bro. Like, even if it seems like I'm not in this game, I'm still in this game, right? And and that old head just know that confidence of like, I'll find a way back. I don't know what it is right now, and we know that he doesn't have a plan right now, but he's confident that he's gonna find a way through this. And then we see him melt down a little bit afterwards, right? The real mortality of being older is actually, you know, hitting him. So a lot of that stuff was just like so delightful. They didn't cut away from it. They just stayed on these two characters and these two actors doing their thing. So
they are letting Sam Jackson be Sam Jackson. Like when he delivered that line, when I'm out, I'm still in. Like that, I laughed out loud. That was such a Sam Jackson moment.
Yeah. Or the train conversation with Talos, which, by the way, I think that kind of got lost in the myth of lost in the wind of that awesome Don, you know, conversation with Rhodey and Sam. But like that train conversation was awesome, where he's like, "Yo, 1 million Skrulls." He's like, 1 million here? What, you out your reptilian ass mind? And then when he have the whole bit about we've been fighting each other since we could stand upright. There's not enough tolerance or space on here for another species. I low-key stood up and started clapping. I was like, thank you! Because that is such a hilariously accurate summation of human history. That boy said, Talos, look at us. You know we can't get along. You're seeing this shit. But back to the conversation that PC was talking about.
But he still fights for a better world, right? In some ways. And he still fights to protect it. So it's
but you got to be a realist.
This dichotomy, yeah. He's like optimistic.
We could coexist.
And not at all.
Said we could coexist. What? Nah, come on, B. You don't believe that yourself. You know you don't believe that. But another part of the conversation with those two I want to say before we can move on that I appreciated was
let's hear the black dude thoughts.
Very much the same reason why I enjoyed the show New Girl is when shows can have I'm going somewhere with this. When shows can have multiple black leads that very much summarize that black people are not a monolith. Black folk got all kinds of different opinions and people who don't agree and you don't just. They sold me on that so well because there's a camp of people who I think very much generally will align more with Rhodey's line of thinking of, I appreciate you, I respect you personally, professionally, but I am more, you gotta earn it in a certain way. And then others who are a bit more, I want to look out for people who look like me regardless of what that looks like. And I guess what I appreciate is that there's no wrong answer because I feel like I've been on both sides of that, where I've been on the Sam Jackson side of, hey man, you need to help a brother out with this situation. Now, obviously the stakes are a little bit different, but I've been on that side of it. And I've also been on the side of, hey, just because, not all skin folk are kinfolk either, and so just the fact that the show was able to really, I think, capture that. Even, Don's point about, hey man, we share an ancestral connection, a professional connection, a personal connection. I was like, it just sold me on the convictions of these different characters, and it really made me realize the writers know what they're doing with these characters. Because they really did make Samuel Jackson seem like the more laissez-faire, kind of more old school compared to the button-up tight, no, we follow procedure military guy. And, that's a real thing. People, I've met old drill sergeant black dudes who, ideologically speaking, we have next to nothing in common. And that's okay. But how do you reconcile that with, okay, we might not have anything in common in terms of our personal beliefs in this, but how does that align with race and how we see it an obligation to people who look like us? And, what's the sliding scale of that? But a lot of shows don't do that, period. A lot of shows you're not going to get, especially in a show like this, you're not going to get multiple black leads who have very distinctly different worldviews and experiences. And I'm glad that they went all in on that because, again, like New Girl with the characters with Coach and Winston, both black dudes, completely different ways of going about things in life. And I'm like, cool, this is the quality representation I like to see in media. I'm not sure, I can't think of shows in my head now that have multiple Asian characters who are very distinct from one another, but I'm sure when you do see it, it feels good because it's cool. You don't have to put all these traits into one box for a character or define them by their race. Not to say that War Machine or Nick Fury were ever defined by their race, but it's a good balance of recognizing, hey, these are still black men, even if everything that they do isn't motivated by that.
I was going to say, part of me actually rubbed a little bit wrong that Fury was asking for favors in a sense just because Rhodey was black, or he thought that he was going to have an in with Rhodey. And it feels like, well, then you didn't know Rhodey very well, I guess, or you miscalculated that, which seems like a very un-Nick Fury thing to do. And Nick Fury is never talked about race in that way or used his race as a reason for doing something, right? In Captain Marvel, that never came up, and Avengers, that never really comes up. And it's interesting that in this particular iteration of Nick Fury, they're sort of letting him explore that a little bit. But in some ways, it felt a little bit incongruous with what we know of Nick Fury in the past. In the past, he's just sort of been I'm the dude, right? I know what to do. I know what the plan is. You're the best person for this job. I'm going to hire you. He's not gone out of his way to hire a diverse Avengers, group. The Avengers are mostly white guys and white girls, all of those things. He's just picking people with the right power set for the right reason, and or for the job that he wants them to do. Maybe not the right reason.
So what I'll say is that Fury's talking. Fury's brought up race in previous stuff before. There was definitely some distinct monologues. I forgot which one. I don't know if it's Captain America 2, but there's a whole bit where he's talking to Steve about his granddad and how his granddad's experience with racism. There's been a decent amount. Like, it's not something that's like defining entire movies, but I don't think they've whitewashed his character where he just doesn't mention his race as a part of like his just philosophy in the world. I have to find some of like the old like clips, but there's some distinct moments I remember where he explicitly does do that. So like
I just hadn't remembered that.
I do want to push back on that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I hadn't remembered those things. I think the other thing is like he what I did like vibe with was him saying like the mediocre Alexander Pierces of the world, right? And he had mentioned, I think previously, that like he had really saved Alexander Pierce, right? It was through his excellence, in the field of battle or whatever that had saved him. And then Alexander Pierce ended up being not only Hydra, but also like, Secretary of Defense or, whatever position he held, like this very high position. And he's just kind of like, you can have a chip on your shoulder about other people getting promoted past you, especially if they're not actually as capable as you are. And so that to me was like, oh yeah, okay, like that I vibe with, and I think that's something Rhodey would also understand. And so that felt like the argument to make there that he did well. Should we move on?
I think one of the things about this show though is that they're leaning hard into Sam Jackson as, this long beloved actor of many decades career who has a very certain personality. I feel like the show's leaning into that a lot, which is great. And it's a shame that the MCU hasn't done that quite as much before. But at the same time, it feels like they're pulling back on the character Nick Fury a lot as well. So we're sort of getting we're getting Sam Jackson and his kind of ethos, and you can almost feel his input into the show. But Nick Fury as a character, in contrast, feels a little neutered, and is not able to do a lot of Nick Fury things. Like kind of like what you're saying, even having this conversation with Rhodey, something about it doesn't feel very Nick Fury-esque. Like I think Nick Fury is more on the sly, is several steps ahead of people, knows how to manipulate situations. He's very much on the back foot, and I realize that's part of the story, right? Like Nick Fury is on is coming from behind in this, and it's like hard to watch over 2 episodes already where he's really far behind. He just does not feel like the master spy that we come to expect. I realize that's
we're wondering
part of
if
the
he's
story
just
of the show.
Lost touch.
It's just not like it. It makes it not land as well as you'd hope for. So that's something to look out for. Well, he's probably gonna have a, like a hero's return or something, midway. Or,
100%.
75% of the way through. But yeah, it's something to look out for. And I do think though the reveal at the end of episode 2 is going to play a major part in all of this, right? And why
that's going to be super interesting.
Nick Fury is in the situation that he's in.
Mm-hmm.
What reveal are you talking about?
His wife is a Skrull.
That his wife is a Skrull.
Is that episode 2?
It's episode
Does
2.
he know that she's a Skrull? Probably.
I think so. Yeah. I think
we and Sav were talking about that. Like, they played it like he doesn't know because she was in her Skrull form, and then when he came in, she turned back into her human form. But maybe, maybe that's just like how they're more comfortable together.
No, I think that's 100% because they established in the first episode that the fighters for Gravik, who are the deep cover Skrull, never change their forms because you want to always just be on your toes. So even if you're by yourself, you stay into your form. And I think they dropped that line of dialogue to make it explicitly clear that, if, in that situation, she's not in deep cover because she's just at home chopping vegetables. So if she's just doing that with regular clothes on, she's probably not on a deep cover mission. And we established that Gravik already said he had a chance to kill Fury and didn't. So it wouldn't make sense to have a spy ready to try and kill him if you already had a chance and you intentionally didn't.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the flashback when Gravik is a kid is brought and Fury makes the promise to the Skrulls. The Skrull who brought him the kid, who he kind of was talking to, is the same Skrull that was at his house. So like my understanding is that these two just are actually tight like that and are married. And like that's his actual wife, which it's not the wildest thing considering Fury and like that's not some weird out-of-pocket stuff, all things considered. One thing I want to say though,
it feels a little bit weird. Like
Well,
how do
William Shatner did
interspecies,
it.
You know, relations.
stop. You overthinking it, Wes. Stop. You're overthinking it.
You didn't think of that?
No, because I'm not 8. Did you think
How do
about
their
that when it
reproductive
came
parts
to
work
Ego
together?
and the mama and Guardians?
Ego and the Guardians, definitely. How did that work? Except he had a human form, and they mentioned that he had human, you know.
The
Parts.
Skrulls have a human form.
All right.
Point is, one thing I'll add though about the Nick Fury stuff, and this, you know, it like to what extent Sam Jackson is kind of embodying the character. Do not forget that this is a comic thing too. When they made the ultimate version of Fury in 2001, Sam Jackson literally signed off on them using his likeness for the character. So 10 years before we even got the Marvel movies, Samuel L. Jackson was already Nick Fury. That's why when
Very
it was on
Black
screen,
Mirror.
it looked even more badass. I was like, what'd you say?
That's very
I mean,
Black
Fury's
Mirror.
Fury's a nerd. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson's a nerd, point blank. So, like, I guess my point is that Nick Fury already had those Samuel L. Jackson-esque influences in his dialogue, even in the comics, even in the early movies. So I'm not surprised that we're getting more of it. But to your point, Brian, I agree. Storyline-wise, he's definitely not in his prime. The question is, how does he return to his prime, and how does that then impact his dialogue and character interactions? I'm, again, hoping that we get that in the next episode or so soon because, that's a really fun version of the character to see. And I actually would appreciate this version more knowing that this is temporary and then we get him more on top of his game. Because right now everyone's saying he's old, he's got a limp, he's a shadow of himself, something. Everybody's shitting on him. Everybody's been shitting on my son the whole first 2 episodes. Like, man, he's washed. Get him out of here. They talking about him like, you know, he LeBron Brown when he missed the playoffs. Like, hey, hold on. Let my son get back in proper form before y'all start writing my guy off. But again, this is going to be one of those, how I view this is really going to depend on how they stick the landing and some of the other execution. But I think they're on the right path.
I'm excited. All right, so you're into it. Brian, you into it? You going to keep watching?
Of course, I'm going to keep watching. Am I going to enjoy every moment of it? I'm not sure. They've delivered an up and down first 2 episodes. Starting with down, then up. So we'll see which direction they go the next few.
It's better than up than down.
I'm hopeful.
I mean,
I'm
like to
hopeful.
think
I
it's an
do think
upward swing.
this feels like better than Falcon and the Winter Soldier so far. But maybe worse than some of the more creative outings of the MCU TV shows.
You love Hawkeye. Just admit it.
Yeah, where's the Christmas tree? There's no Christmas tree.
Hey, wait. So do y'all know about Super Skrull?
Yes.
So okay, I only know about it because I watched the YouTube.
And because you
recaps,
play
but-
Marvel
Super
Snap.
Skrull.
Well, okay, so Marvel Snap,
Super Skrull.
the default card shows him with a like a wrecking ball fist, basically, or like a brick fist, and it's like
Yeah.
all super stretched out.
Yeah.
And then his other arm is on fire.
Yeah.
Never really paid attention to it before.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Great
Four,
card, by the way, in Marvel Snap.
that's
if
what
you
that's
have
about.
Him. Very good. Yeah, but apparently that's the power set that they had copied is the Fantastic Four's power set right away. So, or that was the first thing they tried. So that makes sense now that the Marvel Snap card is that, and then now we see the different powers that they're trying to engender. So like Groot will be the super stretchy part, right? Like he's gonna have the arm branches grow, so that'll be the super stretch part. And then they had, who else did they have? Oh, they had like
the extremist things, those fire people that
Yeah,
were
so
from
that'll
Iron
be
Man
like-
3.
exactly. So that'll be like Johnny Storm, and then they don't have an invisibility one, but they did have like kind of the super strength one.
Yeah, from Call
embedded in there.
Obsidian, one of Thanos' goons. And by the way,
And
that
the
was
Frost
a really,
Giant thing.
yeah. By the way, those were
Frosties.
all really good callbacks to just random MCU little just like tidbits. It's like sometimes you'll think, hey, what happened to a boy's hand? Like, it doesn't really mean anything, but
Right.
it's nice to know, hey, yeah, I guess if we were secretly invaded by a bunch of shapeshifters who need a superhero contingency plan, they're out here gathering superhuman DNA. Like that makes perfect sense in the context of their motives and their capabilities. Like, right, like Groot left behind branches in Wakanda after the battle there. The Frost Beast got stranded at the end of Thor 2 in the Crow's-Cutted scheme. Like, the creature was running around. Also, I think its ability is going to have something to do with the infrared spectrum. That's my guess if they're going to copy the Invisible Woman stuff. Like, that's my my guess, because frost creature, whatever, right? The fire dudes from Iron Man 3, like they were even in like Shang-Chi, right, in that fighting pit arena. Like I do like how Marvel's doing a good job of saying, hey, these things that happen in these movies, they don't just conveniently disappear off the earth. They might not be defining a bunch of stuff, but they still have a role to play. And I thought, like, me pausing the screen and reading each of those little entries, I got legit hyped as hell. So the fact that we're getting Super Skrull is, I mean, he's in the video game Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and he was one of my main characters. So, like, I used to play him for years and just do Super Skrull shit. So I can't wait to see what that looks like on screen.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they're going to try to put all these abilities in, like, one Skrull, or if, like, different Skrulls are going to have different abilities.
Historically, I think the point has been, like, if they want to stay even a little true to the original character, Super Skrull's a champion of his people. He's like a ultimate bio. He's almost like their Captain America of, like, hey, we just going to make a badass super warrior who just puts in work. So I'd imagine it'll just be one Skrull. Having a whole army of Skrull people with that, they didn't even do that in the comics, and I think they didn't because that's frankly
a little
lot.
OP. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit much. So it's I'm excited. Like that's gonna be fun to see play out. But I
bet you it's gonna be graphic. I feel like in one of the previews I saw or like trailers, like he had like a Groot arm come out or something.
Oh, see, I didn't watch any of the trailers for that because I was like, and I'm glad I didn't because that would have spoiled that. And I'm
sorry.
Thanks, Wes.
Well,
somebody's gonna get a Groot arm. I don't know if it was graphic, but somebody's gonna get a Groot arm.
It'll almost certainly be graphic. I don't think there's any other good reason to give the other Skrull. Graphic is also a badass who can actually fight. So. And they've established that. I don't think they're gonna just give generic Goon the awesome power set.
Well, his right hand man has like had a little bit of a role, so maybe they could give it to him too. But yeah, all right. Pagan, something like that. Let's wrap it up there. I don't know. I'm a little bit lukewarm on this show so far, but I did really like that second episode. I texted Sav, like I really enjoyed the second one. So if the third one is as good and we kind of keep it rolling, then hats off to Marvel. If it falls back to episode 1, and me and Brian were talking about this, like it's not like episode 1 is bad.
Y'all are talking. Okay.
Well, someone woke up late and didn't show up, so what did we have to talk about?
MF, I was like 8 minutes late. Don't you try and throw me under the bus.
In those 8 minutes we talked about, and you got mad that we talked about things, so you brought it upon yourself. I'm sorry that you were late.
I'm about to be petting the bell on your punk ass. Do you think? Keep talking, talk your talk.
Well, I was saying, like, I didn't necessarily understand the ins and outs of why the first episode didn't feel as great as the second episode. For me, I think it was just like, there's a lot of new characters, a lot of things I didn't remember, and it just felt like I was always trying to get my footing, and then they tried to do too many, like, reveals, like, Ross being a Skrull, and then you're like, well, is he really a Skrull? And then nobody even really tries to figure it out, right? And so it's like kind of like left by the side. And then Maria Hill dies at the end. It's like, oh man, that's a big deal, but like we just kind of, that ends the show. And so there's all these like, and we're seeing Nick Fury not be on top of his game. And then we're seeing Gaia, and we're like, who's Gaia? Like, is she looks familiar? Like, are we having Game of Thrones crossover? And then it's like Talos. It's like Brian was telling me he didn't remember who Talos was, and I was like, yeah, but that's the guy from like Star Wars, but like he's not. So what was his character in this one? And I didn't remember like what he was like. So there's all this stuff you're trying to remember in the first one, and they do a good job of catching you up eventually, but they do an okay job. It just felt like there was a lot of moving pieces and not a lot of like substance to grab onto. Like I think we could have been okay just focusing on like one character, right? Just focusing on Talos or something like that for more of the episode. But it was what it was. The second episode really shines in terms of like we get those juicier moments. So
you're like a baby.
Just interesting. I mean, yeah. But like I said, it wasn't bad. It just didn't feel as good as the second episode, and I had a hard time putting my finger on why. I don't know. Brian, did you have any more thoughts about like why that first one felt so much better? You don't have to get in the nitty-gritty details, but it's like
it was kind of all over the place.
Or didn't work.
They're trying to establish too many things, and really we don't have, as an audience, didn't really have an investment in any of it at that point. And I think what's different about the second episode is that they put front and foremost like the whole idea of deception, and that there's these things that are happening, and those things have real stakes, right? And you're worried about who's playing what side, and I think that comes into the forefront and makes that episode feel much more tense, right? And then on top of that, you get the back and forth between the characters trying to struggle with those with that conflict, right? In the first episode, it's kind of like, let's just throw everybody together, and they're talking about stuff that we don't understand, and then like there's a bomb at the end, right? And I think it just it falls flat because they're really not. They haven't given us a chance to catch up to what's going on. I kind of think like the first episode, if they had, as you said, stuck with a singular character or like really give us an entry point into the storyline, it could have worked a lot better. And part of it is the whole Nick Fury factor, right? Where like Nick Fury actually hasn't been such a major moving part of the show so far. Like he's sort of in a backseat position. Like he's just along for the ride. He's not so much driving what's going on. And I think he's our entry point, right, into Secret Invasion. So that was kind of lacking and, just falls flat ultimately because of it.
Savon?
I mean, I think it's a good show. I'm extremely excited. Like I said, I think the second episode was obviously way better than the first, but I recognize for any of these like types of thriller type shows where there's going to be twists, I usually just kind of give the first episode or so a little bit of grace because they have to establish a bunch of stuff. And this is this is one of those. I think that the first episode will look better in hindsight depending on how the rest of this series goes. And, when I do my eventual rewatch, that'll really be something I'll be able to kind of have a stronger opinion on. But I don't disagree that the first episode wasn't perfect. But again, like basically for me, it'll come down to how long do we have this diminished version of Fury? If we don't have it for long, it makes the first 2 episodes way better retroactively. If we have it for too long, it'll make them worse retroactively. So I kind of want to like view this as a completed product before I really reserve judgment, just because, shows like Game of Thrones are proof that like all the earlier stuff can be undermined by the ending. So let's just see how they kind of take it from here. But it's a 6-episode series, so I don't think it's going to drag on. So I feel good about just the whole collective project. I have some theories. I have some theories about character stuff, but
I feel like now's the time to throw them out. Call your shot.
Okay, here's my theory. My theory is that Gravik is like him and Fury have a way deeper relationship than what we actually realize.
He's Fury's son.
Fury has a wife. I don't think that's that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like he met him as a kid, learned that he was a survivor. He got brought by the woman who eventually was his wife and found him. Like he explicitly said, I don't want to kill Fury because I want him to suffer. I'm like, all right, so there's way deeper beef than just I want to win. I don't know exactly. And, now I just want to learn more about Fury's marriage and how that plays into all of this because that's clearly going to be a key point. But yeah, Brian, I think Gravik and Fury have like a father-son type deal going on. This is a strange Skrull son who got radicalized.
Oh yeah, maybe he was one of his operatives in S.H.I.E.L.D. already or something. Maybe that's where he learned how to do all of this, like, string pulling that Gravik's been doing.
I mean, they said from the beginning, they said from the start, right, when he met him, this kid fled on a ship. He's a survivor. They made it clear, and they said, hey, literally, it was the wife, Vara, I think, Fury's wife, who wanted to induct him into the work. Fury was like, no. And she was just like, nah. So Fury 100% trained him and all that. It's just a matter of, very much like the Mujahideen. You train people, don't have an exit strategy or a long-term plan, and then they use that shit against you. And bam, just like that, we're on the precipice of World War III.
Damn it. All right, friends. Well, that'll do it for us. Hit us up on Instagram at confidently_pod. What did you think of the first 2 episodes? Are you in it or are you out? What did you think of Don Cheadle and Samuel L. Jackson going at it head to head in the middle of an empty dining room?
Wesley's a Skrull, y'all.
I would be the worst Skrull in the history of mankind.
Would. Yeah, because isn't that whole thing they only can copy like recent memories? So I'm like, even if Wes was a Skrull, he can't remember old stuff. So now we just can't actually fact check. We got to chop a pinky tip off.
Oh, I'd be so bad. All right,
the tip
friends,
of the
that'll do it.
pinky.
See you later. Bye.
Ho!